Ep 52, How to Lose Belly Fat After 60. What actually works, if you have noticed that belly fat seems to accumulate more easily after 60, and resist every attempt to shift it, you are not imagining it. The distribution of body fat changes fundamentally with age, driven by hormonal shifts, muscle loss, and metabolic changes that specifically promote abdominal fat storage. But abdominal fat, particularly visceral fat, the deep fat surrounding the organs, is not merely cosmetic. It is metabolically active tissue that secretes inflammatory compounds, raises blood pressure, drives insulin resistance, and significantly increases the risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. The good news is that visceral fat is the most responsive type of fat to lifestyle intervention. Even modest reductions, 5 to 10% of body weight, produce dramatic improvements in metabolic health. Today we're covering what actually works. Several age-related changes drive abdominal fat accumulation. Hormonal shifts. In women, the decline in estrogen at menopause fundamentally alters fat distribution, from hips and thighs to the abdomen. Estrogen had actively directed fat storage away from visceral depots. Its absence removes that protection. In men, declining testosterone reduces the muscle-to-fat ratio and promotes abdominal deposition. Cortisol elevation. Chronic stress, combined with age-related changes in the HPA axis, produces higher baseline cortisol in older adults. Cortisol is the primary fat storage hormone with a particular affinity for visceral adipose tissue. Muscle loss, sarcopenia, reduces resting metabolic rate. Less muscle means fewer calories burned at rest, and the same caloric intake produces progressive fat gain. Insulin resistance. As cells become less responsive to insulin, the body produces more of it, and elevated insulin promotes fat storage, particularly visceral fat. No specific food burns belly fat, but certain dietary patterns consistently produce visceral fat reduction. Reduce refined carbohydrates and added sugar. These are the primary drivers of insulin spikes, insulin resistance, and visceral fat accumulation. Eliminating sugary drinks, white bread, pastries, and ultra-processed foods is the single most impactful dietary change for visceral fat reduction. Increase protein. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It reduces appetite, preserves muscle mass during weight loss, and has the highest thermic effect. Aim for 2 to 1. 6 grams per kilogram of body weight, spread across all meals. Increase fiber. Soluble fiber specifically reduces visceral fat. It feeds beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, which modulate fat storage hormones. A 10-gram daily increase in soluble fiber is associated with a 3.7% reduction in visceral fat over 5 years in studies. Time-restricted eating, eating within an 8 to 10-hour window, reduces insulin exposure and promotes fat oxidation during the fasting period. Multiple clinical trials confirm meaningful visceral fat reduction with this approach. Aerobic exercise is the most effective exercise mode for visceral fat reduction. Multiple meta-analyses confirm that moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise, brisk walking, cycling, swimming, produces significant visceral fat loss even without caloric restriction. The dose matters. At least 150 minutes weekly of moderate intensity, with greater loss at higher volumes. Resistance training preserves and builds muscle mass, raising resting metabolic rate and improving insulin sensitivity. Even when the scale doesn't move dramatically, resistance training recomposes body composition, reducing fat and increasing muscle simultaneously. The most effective combination is aerobic plus resistance training, done consistently. 3 sessions of each per week, alternating days, produces the best metabolic outcomes in older adults. NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the calories burned through daily movement outside formal exercise, walking, standing, household tasks. Sedentary older adults who increase their daily step count to 8,000 to 10,000 steps produce significant metabolic improvements without any formal exercise program. Sleep deprivation is one of the most underappreciated drivers of abdominal fat. Inadequate sleep raises ghrelin, the hunger hormone, suppresses leptin, the satiety hormone, and elevates cortisol. Sleep-deprived adults consume an average of 300 more calories daily and preferentially store those calories as visceral fat. 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep is a genuine fat loss strategy, not a luxury. Stress management directly reduces cortisol and therefore visceral fat deposition. Exercise, mindfulness, social connection, and adequate sleep all reduce baseline cortisol. The cumulative effect of chronic, unmanaged stress on abdominal fat accumulation is substantial. Spot reduction, targeting belly fat with crunches or abdominal exercises, does not work. Abdominal exercises strengthen the core muscles but do not preferentially burn local fat. Fat is mobilized systemically, not locally. Most FAT-burning supplements have no credible evidence behind them. Green tea extract has a very modest effect. The rest is marketing. Crash dieting, severe caloric restriction, causes rapid muscle loss and metabolic adaptation that makes future fat loss harder. Modest caloric deficit of 300 to 500 calories per day, sustained consistently, produces better long-term visceral fat loss than severe restriction. Belly fat after 60 is not simply a cosmetic problem, and it is not an inevitable one. The combination of reduced refined carbohydrates, increased protein and fiber, consistent aerobic and resistance exercise, adequate sleep, and stress management produces real, measurable visceral fat reduction, and with it, dramatically improved metabolic health. Start with the biggest lever: cut sugary drinks and ultra-processed food. Everything else builds on that foundation. See you in the next video.